This is a story that my mother always told me was true. When my mother was pregnant, she and my father lived just outside of Cebu City in the Philippines. Since my father was usually working long hours in the city, that would leave my mother at home most of the time. But since my parents had a bit of money, she at least had help to keep her company, especially late into the evening. One night, while my mother was resting in her room, one of the maids started knocking frantically on her door. After she told the maid to come in, my mother could tell that she looked really frightened about something. Upon asking her what exactly was wrong, the maid told my mother that she and the other help had seen something in the trees. Not having the energy to deal with something silly, my mother was about to dismiss the maid. They think that it's not just some animal, but a manananggal. In Filipino culture, a manananggal is a hideous creature that can separate from its lower body and fly into the air using its bat-like wings. It is said to prey on pregnant women and feed on their unborn baby. My mother knew about the tales of the creature, but she didn't exactly believe them. The maids, however, insisted that my mother call the cops to take care of the disturbance. Knowing that the maids weren't going to let the issue go, my mother instead told them that she'd take care of it herself. Despite the pleas that the maids for my mother to not get involved, she instead insisted and went outside. There, on the porch, with the maids pointing, they stared at a large tree that was located on the other side of the yard. At first, my mother didn't see anything unusual, but after a few moments, her eyes finally locked onto a pair of eyes that were shining from within the darkness of the tree's branches. It's at that moment when my mother said she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up, and it was at this time that my mother finally felt really scared. The maids were already hysterical at this point. Feeling unsafe, my mother directed one of the male help with the unfortunate task to confront whatever was in the tree. The handyman used a garden tool for protection as he slowly approached the tree. But since whatever was in the tree was so high up, he used rocks that were nearby to throw at the unknown creature. After a few attempts, one of the rocks finally hit its target. And that's when everybody heard a loud shriek come from atop the tree. Frightened, everybody started running back inside the house for safety. But during the panic, everybody was able to get a glimpse of something flying out of the tree. Even though it was really dark, my mother and the others would describe whatever it was as a creature with large, bat-like wings connected to a human torso, with what looked like intestines hanging from below. Fortunately for them, the creature had flown into the jungle. With my mother and all of the help scared beyond belief, she finally agreed to call the cops. The cops came later that night, but after a thorough search, the cops weren't able to find any sign of anything suspicious around the property. My father had also come home early to comfort my mother after being told of what had happened. Even though there was no sign of any creature, my mother and all the help were very paranoid for a while after the incident. They would be very cautious every time they had to leave the house at night. Tragically, a few weeks later, my mother would have a miscarriage. Despite my mother never believing in the Manananggal before, she was now sure that's what the creature was that night. And even though it didn't actually take out and feast on the fetus from inside her belly, my mother was convinced that the Manananggal was responsible for taking the baby's soul. I'm not sure exactly what happened that night, but I'm sure that my mother believes everything she saw. My father, on the other hand, didn't believe any of it. And even though this may sound horrible for me to say, I feel fortunate that my mother wasn't pregnant with me on the night she saw the Manananggal